So, Ester and Aunt Brandy, they drove about 15 minutes, found a restaurant, Chinese restaurant that Aunt Brandy claimed would have the best Chinese food available in Chicago. And the name was Sha Tin Cuisine. And Brandy and Esther was excited. She said, Sha Tin is where my father and I spent much of my life. It's a wonderful part of China. She said, this is very exciting. The two of them walked up to the restaurant hand in hand. And at the entrance were a lot of photographs pasted to the outside of the glass entryway. Photos of the old Sha Tin district, which brought back memories to Esther. She said, yes, all of these photos are places I have been and have seen. They are wonderful places. Esther's stomach growled again, and she said, we'd better go in and have some food. I am very hungry. So as they entered, a man came up and said, I am Mr. Hung. Welcome to my restaurant. And how may I serve you? And Brandy spoke up very quickly and said, my niece is in town, just arrived, and she would love to have some wonderful Chinese food. I told her this is the restaurant to have that. Mr. Hung boasted proudly and said, thank you so much for your confidence. And yes, we do have wonderful Chinese food. Where would you like to sit? He said, because it is early and you do not need reservations, and we can place you anywhere you wish. Esther quickly spoke up and said, perhaps a table against the wall. And so Mr. Hung led them to a table. Esther quickly took a chair with her back to the wall, a somewhat defensive position that her training had taught her, force of habit that she would perform. And so they ordered their food. It was really, really wonderful Chinese food. And one of the waiters, he noticed as he was pouring some water into their glasses to refill them, that Esther had some ink on the upper part of her back. Her blouse collar had just slipped down enough to where he could see there was a tattoo on her back, and some of the ink was visible. And for some reason, he was puzzled by this, and he bowed and left and went to the back kitchen, and he spoke to Mr. Hung. All of the kitchen staff came out along with Mr. Hung, and he spoke to Esther in Chinese. And in Chinese he asked her, is your name Shanzidu, daughter of Mr. Ho? Esther realized, for some reason, this man knew her name as referred to by her adopted father in China, and so she decided it was time to sit up and do a formal greeting of Mr. Hung. And so she stood up, bowed to him, and said, yes, my adopted father named me Shanzidu many, many years ago. He is like a father to me, and he has named me Shanzidu quite some time ago. When we first met, it is the name, as you know, of a beautiful mountain region. Mr. Hung said, I am so pleased that you're here because Mr. Dong is like a brother to me. And I had been with him for over 20 years before I came to this country. I was his chef, his cook, and made many, many meals for him. But I only came to this country to be with my son. Esther was very surprised that Mr. Hung had been friends with her master and adopted father. So Mr. Hung said, the adopted daughter of my best friend, who I think of as a brother, could be and should be my niece. I would be proud if you would call me your niece. And so Mr. Hung asked Esther to call him Uncle. And of course Esther accepted that, was very pleased. And she told him so. She said, I would be proud to call the brother of my adopted father Uncle. And so after shaking hands and bowing to each other, and most of the staff in the restaurant, Esther went back to the table, sat down, and Brandy was amazed. What just happened, she said. Esther explained that one of her teachers in China was like an adopted father, and he thought of her as a daughter, and that Mr. Hung was like a brother to him. And so now Mr. Hung would like to be called Uncle by Esther. And Brandy was amazed. Brandy said, you traveled halfway across the world only to find family here that is from China? That is amazing. It truly is a small world. And Esther smiled, yes. Yes, it is a small world. So they finished their supper. Brandy actually had been pretty hungry too. Esther was puzzled about this, and Brandy confided in her that sometimes for lunch she didn't actually go out and have a meal. She would meet a man and they would have a nice intimate time together. So Brandy understood that Esther was old enough to understand this and not be judgmental. So after the meal, Brandy asked, shouldn't there be a bill? And Esther said, no. My uncle would be offended if we paid for this. Even to leave a tip would be offensive. He is now my uncle, and he is very pleased to have provided a meal for us. And so we can go home now. I am really feeling, Ester told Aunt Brandy, I am really feeling exhausted. She had never felt this exhausted before. Ester had never traveled halfway across the world before, and so the jet lag was really affecting her. Very, very much so. And so they got up and started to leave. Mr. Hung walked up very quickly and said to both of them, "Thank you for coming and welcome to his restaurant." And he said to Ester, "Welcome back home, and you are always welcome here. Please come again after you have settled down. We have much to discuss." Ester smiled, and the two, Aunt Brandy and Ester, left. And Brandy lived fairly close, maybe 20 minutes away. It was a nice apartment complex. Her apartment was small. It was 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. And when they walked in, Ester took off her shoes and set her luggage down and saw a sofa. She went up to it, laid down, and fell immediately asleep. So Brandy went to the bedroom, found a pillow and a blanket, made Ester as comfortable as she could, and then spent the rest of the night thinking about what they might be doing for the weekend and in the future, and reminiscing about the past. She fell asleep a bit early for Brandy, and the two slept very well that night.